It's been a while since I did a meaningful review on a Disney movie, as most people know my heart and focus on Disney villains specifically. Yet looking back on it now, I found the time and the courage to put in more effort to really talk about the things I love the most. And one of the biggest examples of this is in fact the legendary underrated classic Treasure Planet, a movie that lives on in the hearts of many of my own generation who truly loved its story and refreshing takes on classics of old, just like Treasure Island, the one that was now marked in a very infamous time in Disney history, backstabbing their own 2D films amidst the rise of 3D evident by Pixar and DreamWorks in their own new releases. And I'm sure already everyone is aware of that. You've already probably seen videos in the past discussing each point of how Disney didn't do the right by making this film and the time it was released when they also just released other films like Lilo & Stitch that was released during the same year earlier that summer. The weird facts were sometimes the studio does release 2 films in the same year, seen as recently as 2021 with Raya the Last Dragon and Encanto, which makes no sense in terms of what they could have made during the same time had it spread out. Of course, I will talk a little bit more about that still in terms of this video, comparing the facts that Disney has done Treasure Island stories in the past and the real fact that brought live action films for the studio after expanding its animation, but how this video should just aim for the heart and soul of why we love it so. The fact of Treasure Planet and what happened behind the scenes is not going to take up the forefront because we should appreciate the story for what it is. Because mentioning the past is the simple fact that I did make a video, or several videos if you know my love of repeating talking about past characters, about the villain John Silver, one of the best villains who actually turned out to be a force for good in terms of his own unique relationship with the hero Jim Hawkins. And I'm bringing this up not just for the fact that I'm going to be talking about him for the upteenth time in this broader context of the film again, but for something close to my own family. In fact, this entire idea was inspired by this event that happened to be my sister's wedding, surprisingly enough. Knowing now that my own brother-in-law is also a fan of this film, when his best man brought that up during the entire toast. In fact, going as far as ending his speech with a quote from the film that was delivered by John Silver himself, to chart your own course, which had really got to me. Not for the fact it's the best part of the film, obviously, but now for the fact that I hear other members of my family stick by those quotes, and also the fact that I forgot to record that part since my sister tasked me to record most of her wedding. Great job all done, you really screwed that one up, because even Disney themselves last year during their 100th anniversary had kept that speech in, validating Treasure Planet, and you couldn't even validate your own sister's wedding by recording every single piece of it, because you are just such a great brother. But anyways, besides focusing on what I did or didn't do wrong for my sister that doesn't deserve to be discussed on a predominantly Disney or film focused channel, I realized that no matter what, Treasure Planet is a film that is worth every penny. The work of John Musker and Ron Clements should truly be commended, going far as during their work at the time they were developing The Little Mermaid. A true passion project in my opinion that many should appreciate, and certainly Disney themselves for that matter, throwing this era under the bus for films like Chicken Little. Well, maybe not to that extent jokingly enough, but when I hear other people start to recite the important lines of a villain that influenced the hero for the better, I start to find myself noticing how truly important such a film like this really was, in its story and its character content, that it remains to be the true underrated masterpiece we've all been speaking for of the past few years, and now its own status as a cult classic that we should certainly always be reminded of. Is it the best Disney film that they have to offer? No, I really don't think it's that good. It's still a great film, but how it accomplished what it needed to be. So in terms of speaking about all of this, let us praise Treasure Planet for being such an underrated masterpiece. But before we officially begin, we of course have to go back into Disney's own history, as I've shown many times with Walt Disney's own 1950 Treasure Island, the first major live action film that they ever produced. Which honestly, your first thoughts would be, why should I mention this at all? What does it do for Treasure Planet when you find out it didn't contribute to the development of the film? Well, that is a fair assumption to make. But then again, this is a Treasure Island adaptation of Robert Louis Stevenson's novel, and its own development still showed it was planned to be an animated film first too, making the first steps that got to us to Treasure Planet. That Walt Disney planned an adaptation since the 1930s of the book, but chose it to become their first live action film, which other films out during the 1940s showed that the interest grew more and more. And you can certainly see that influence play out for Disney, including in the acting of those like Robert Newton as Long John Silver, that actually contributed to the modern image of pirates that that we all knew today. That even in the smallest of circumstances, it paved the way forward for types of stories like Treasure Planet to come out, and you can certainly see the style and the way the story is formed. And how we all know, Treasure Planet did not come out without its own difficulty, with every time they tried to pitch it, whether it be when they worked on The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, or just before they worked on Hercules, the pitch got turned down by executives like Eisner and Katzenberg. And then having Roy Disney later on their side to finally confirm to start a process that would change things forever. Wherever you think that direction might be in terms of the inevitable 3D shift, the poor box office results, and the mismanagement that showed how uninterested these executives were. Just again to remind you that this video is not meant to focus on any of those parts of the behind the scenes attributes of why it did or didn't work or failed in that regard, but about the movie's heart that makes it more impactful in every kid that dare to dream. That we should focus on the story and dedicate it to those attributes that we all love. So instead of actually focusing on all that, let's just dedicate this entire section of the video to the design of the film, the intentions that drove in making Treasure Island into a sci-fi adventure while still keeping the original adventure intact. What they called this during the development was the 70-30 law, 70% traditional and 30% sci-fi. And clearly you can see that in the film with its outward shots and the close-ups between characters of how culturally this society looks, or the technology that allows them to go anywhere in the galaxy, also demonstrated the use of CGI blended within the traditional animation, which I would like to say is a vastly underappreciated element by Disney themselves when you consider their future when they focus on 3D, and then other films in the past like Atlantis, even Lilo and Stitch and Tarzan actually incorporating elements like that into their films more. A blend of two eras that paved the way forward into one we all know today, and the one that makes the case sense for Clements and Musker to head when Little Mermaid started this trend to find ways to make wider shots around the characters move in a motion that only 3D could provide easier, with the music also following this 70-30 split to inherently drill in the nature of this film being simply Treasure Island in space, and the other fact of the two rock songs used in the film, which are great and emotional towards the two main characters. And that is what they use for the most part, taking the original story and honing down on the relationship, starting out with making Jim a smart kid into someone who lacked a proper figure in his life, didn't know who he was specifically, while also still being the same type of intelligent character in the original novel, and doing more for other characters like Silver to be the bigger mentor of the film, while Squire Trelawney and Dr. Livesey had two separate personas guiding Jim to become one like Delbert Doppler, still making an effort to be the same story, but also completely different on its own besides the space angle too, where now we can fully begin to dissect Jim in his own personal story on the planet of Montresor, also within the greater narration of those like Tony J himself.
Flint's secret trove was never found, but stories have persisted that it remains hidden somewhere at the farthest reaches of the galaxy, stowed with riches beyond imagination, the loot of 1,000 worlds. Treasure Planet.
Frollo with his own unmistakable voice in the book that Jim reads, seeking adventure that Captain Flint went on with legendary treasure across the stars, the loot of 1,000 worlds. Here we get to see a picture of a boy with boundless optimism hanging out with his mother on bed, wondering if such legends do really exist for the freedom that life entails. It is in this part that you get to see the true spirit of a hero in their own youth, seeking adventure that all young ones seek to do in their lives, that matches any definition that most seek Disney for in their own heroes. And this attitude grew within the transition we could see right here 12 years later when Jim sails across the planet with no care for the law, causing all sorts of trouble. The reason for this is something we will see later on in the fact that his father both left him and his own mother, something that really wasn't part of the original versions of Jim Hawkins or the overall Treasure Island story. I mean, to be fair, it isn't a largely mentioned aspect in the film other than flashback scenes or some words sprinkled here and there, but this is what sets Treasure Planet apart as its own great piece from the original novel, that you get a look into Jim Hawkins when he was young and then becoming a teen freely doing what he wants to do. The fact that his mother wants him to do better with the people at the inn, like Delbert, with a pattern that is happening for quite a while, that he doesn't know what he actually wants to do with his life and he's lost with no guide. And compared to the original stories beginning at the inn, they are now trying to fully develop his character. Instead of being right here, he is now right there and we get to learn more about him. I mean, to be honest with you, the last time I did read the book was about 10 years ago, and the only adaptations I've ever really watched have just come from Disney like the original one, and more importantly, for me, Muppet Treasure Island, because of characters like Tim Curry, of course. So I'm not sure how much detail of Jim's life was shaped up until the point where he got detained by the police in this version, now actually being sternly talked by his own mother not to waste his life.
Jim, I just don't want to see you throw away your entire future.
What future?
Which is why I love this film so much for making that relationship expand, with a character who seems troubled, not having a proper guide for his own future, and a mother who struggles to keep it afloat amidst other things. A very relatable position where you can feel lost in what you want to the concern of others like your own parents, especially if one family member does not exist to fill in that void anymore. Everything in this relationship is fractured. Not that they hate each other, but they just can't find a way to fill in a missing piece that their father left them with, abysmally with. Which I would like to point out after doing my other villain video on John Silver, is the real antagonist of the entire film, because no person who leaves their family behind, especially their own offspring, like their son, deserves any kind of respect in my opinion. His father just straight up left them to be broken right here with nothing to pick up the pieces. But before we continue down this hard path, we have to go back to the main story with Billy Bones carrying the map of the secret treasure that got a pirate crew led by a mysterious cyborg seeking to uncover, finally dying while they arrived and attacked the inn, unfortunately destroying it. Destroying all of what they were struggling to keep, now back in the dumps while Jim can only walk away in regret before the map was given to him. Finally uncovering the secret of Captain Flint's treasure in the Legend of Treasure Planet.
What? It's Treasure Planet.
The legends of old now bestowed upon him to seek the riches they desire. Well, not kinda like that regard, but now finding a chance to restore their own life with something new and something that clearly fits his own lifestyle choices up until this point. Also, Delbert, who apparently seems giddy at the opportunity, who always wanted to explore in his own life, for his own personal gain of course. Again, becoming that combination character of Dr. Livesey and Squire Trelawney as evident by his own humorous nature, but also a proper adult figurehead to accompany Jim alongside his own journey. I know it's already been stated before earlier, but it's a very good choice that the film did this, and very important to highlight this specific direction of Jim Hawkins, allowing others to have bigger roles while reducing unnecessary screen time, all of which leads to this great conversation with his mother about doing the right thing after everything that has happened.
Mom, look. I know that I keep messing everything up, and I know that I let you down, but this is my chance to make it up to you. I'm gonna set things right.
This is the statement that really makes Jim's character, something short but also sweet that allows us to understand that he's not really rebelling against anything. I mean, okay, clearly society itself a little bit, but in terms of trying to be better for his entire family, better for his mom and for himself to do the right thing rather than the wrong his father took off on, probably searching for adventure too, but in the wrong way that abandons rather than supports like he's trying to do. And if the best way to do that is to go on a journey with a crew across the stars, then do so. Which leads to one of my most favorite shots in the entire film being the Montreasure spaceport shaped like a crescent moon that zooms in and still looks fantastic today, blending its 2D style with a 3D motion. Finally meeting our crew like Mr. Arrow and of course the feisty cat captain Amelia, replacing the original Captain Smollett. And she of course comes across as this no-nonsense captain wanting to keep the ship together and worried about the entire crew that couldn't know about the map, demanding a control on such authority and designating that Jim would work down the quarters with the cook as the cabin boy. So of course he doesn't get into any trouble, which causes a bit of tension being down in the dumps, especially in the fact of working under a cook who is a cyborg whom we all know. The first sighting of the infamous John Silver, who we all need no further introduction at this very point other than to put suspicion into the eyes of the young Hawkins. Also saying that because I've already talked about this character a lot of times, but not as much from the perspective of Jim himself, who wonders about Billy Bones' last words of a cyborg, and his own suspicions kind of confirm this with his two-sided nature of what is right and wrong. Of course, on the outside, it proves to be hard to see that when his boisterous attitude and tremendous cooking and jolly persona exude something of the opposite, but how we see it in the deepest darkest corners to himself of how he tries to make sure he stays in line, confirming that this is the true villain as most would already assume.
We best be keeping a sharp eye on this one, eh, Morph? We wouldn't want him straying into things he shouldn't.
And that's usually par for the course of all the John Silvers, who introduce themselves as wild pirates. Well, maybe not pirates on the outside, but cooks appearing to be piratey in their own attitude, thinking in terms of what I mentioned in both Robert Newton and Tim Curry's performances. Again, apologizing if that's the only two I mentioned, but then again, this is Disney, how can I not mention that? And who is to say this journey isn't without its own merits when Jim finally gets to see the ship take off in the sky with a bunch of space whales and everything he's ever wanted since the very beginning of this film. It is the experience of a lifetime for him, until of course Silver has to take charge and watch over him every step of the way under Captain Amelia's demands after trying to butter her up, schmoozing like any secret pirate with a plot would. And I gotta say, this is probably genius and great for him considering he floats around and needs a guide of his own, tasked simply at this moment to scrub the deck like a good shipmate or cabin boy would at the cost of meeting his own perilous and potentially mutinous crew who could kill him but cannot due to the task at hand and the direction of the top brass. Like the two sides of this character punishes his crew for almost giving them away, attacking him, and the other one just wants to help him out and to discover more about himself.
You ever see what happens to a fresh pup when you squeeze real hard?
John Silver at this point is a villain as any could be, wanting treasure for the crew, but also has rules to his own code, keeping the order as evident by his own schmoozing to Captain Amelia and Mr. Arrow. But the true change in his character is shown by the knowledge of Jim's dad, who left them a long time ago.
Your father not the teaching sort?
No. It was more the taking off and never coming back sort.
Suddenly changing things in his own character and mind, knowing something after thinking otherwise. Like from his perspective, his own attitude makes sense now, other than the info that he probably knows more about his own secret plan than what might seem, finding someone who seems lost, who has aimlessly wandered into places he shouldn't be, and could actually be mentored into something of his own making. I know we already talked about this a few moments back, but this is the moment that solidifies his watch over Jim as he expresses,
Well, since the captain has put you in my charge, like it or not, I'll be pounding a few skills into that thick head of yours to keep you out of trouble.
What?
From now on, I'm not letting you out of my sight.
You can't-
You won't so much as eat, sleep, or scratch your bum without my say-so.
the statement that he made about his own father made him step up to take over that role and take watch over him, all for the reasons that you could think of in both villain and as a mentor to the hero. So you can clearly understand all of his perspectives to watch over him for the reasons of his crew that almost ruins everything, but also for the knowledge of a boy who could potentially be his own mate under him, as past films have shown. Because Silver always had a fondness for Jim Hawkins, and he's going to do whatever it takes to convince him to join in whatever his life has to be, which frankly is free with the promise of treasure. Events that lead to the song I'm Still Here, where while not being quite frankly I expect in tune with the music of the entire film, it still fits emotionally between those two characters. It is the entire core sequence that makes what Treasure Planet is all about, the bond between two souls in an unlikely father-son relationship. I mean, it's tough as you can see his attitude protesting and doing the hard work, but it's also fair as what is rewarded after while getting spliced in between a difficult past knowing Jim's history. And like I said at the very beginning, if there's any character that can be considered the real antagonist of the entire story other than John Silver himself, or even more than what John Silver even is, it has to be Jim's own dad, leaving both of them right there with such unforgivable heartbreak. He has dreams and aspirations as seen here, wanting to build things for the better to impress him, yet he just comes home to simply acknowledge him and move on with his own life. He's just a bastard of the highest order who has very little screen time to show for it. And yeah, I know there's not much to know about his own character, but that's what I can confidently say, since he should have been there and cared about what Jim was capable of, what their lives meant, and what he sacked for whatever reason like many people in the real world would have experienced. I may not have that unfortunate opportunity of experiencing families leaving me like that, but I care deeply for the bonds that all families can have and share regardless of who they can be, because that's the most important thing that all life must cherish and were given to develop a part of their own. Why I mentioned that earlier fact of my sister getting married and the bonds that we all share of those same quotes, that we must stick together, and people like Jim's dad didn't even try to attempt to do that. And Jim hadn't had the best time finding his own self until the most unlikely of circumstances enjoying the personality of Silver, who actually cares even if he gives him a hard back-breaking work. But in the midst of thinking that and remembering what happened when his father left and seeing that right here, Silver actually does something different and comes back to invite him on a journey through the stars. A quick expedition, you might say, where he has the chance to sail. Someone who actually gives a damn. Like always, he does go full blast during these things and Silver does notices and takes heed, but he doesn't scold him for doing that. He actually goes with him and encourages him on. It's a point that I greatly focus on with the fact of him being a good character in the role of a villain, since he does more to support him than any other villain, or especially his father, ever could even do. And when you search for something that finds you meaning, sometimes it does come from the most unexpected of places, and their bond is a testament to why it is the greater film. It does put positive feeling back in the relief of Jimbo, believing he can finally impress the people he loves to make something of himself, while being contrasted to Silver, who knows that's going to be hard to change who he actually is.
I got some plans. Gonna make people see me a little different.
Sometimes plans go astray. You give up a few things. Chasing a dream.
Knowing the path he took himself that got him to this point of becoming a cyborg, not yet paying it off until, well, you know. And you could see that parallel. We may not know a lot about John Silver's own history, but what we do know is he has this distinct connection and love to take and mentor Jim to who he wants to be. But unfortunately, that's an event that quickly gets paused by the incoming supernova that threatens all of their lives before turning into a black hole, showcasing the determination and skills Jim learned along the way to try to secure the ship and the entire crew. But then how you have others like Scroop, a part of that mutinous crew, whom Mr. Arrow was the most suspicious of, taking advantage to remove him out of the equation of their own troubles, making it easier to take over the ship eventually, since that's what they want, eventually getting Jim to blame since he was supposed to tie everything down. And he himself actually unfortunately believes that when Silver knows the truth and tries to comfort him.
I screwed up! I mean, for 2 seconds, I thought that maybe I could do something right, but... I just...
And the problem with Jim is that he doubts himself every single time. Yes, there are other factors of bad actors working behind him where he takes the blame, but no one is free from their own mistakes, and he suffers all the time from this image of not having someone there to support him. Every time in this life we see at the very beginning, he gets caught and he gets punished for doing so. Like, no matter how hard you try, you ultimately fail, and that's the ultimate downfall of a hero and their own self-doubt that anyone of any type constantly deals with. But then how we can have people around us, like our villains, pick us back up, finally getting us to the piece of this entire video and the same quote I did for Silver's own.
You listen to me, James Hawkins. You got the makings of greatness in you, but you gotta take the helm and chart your own course. Stick to it, no matter the squalls. And when the time comes, you get the chance to really test the cut of your sails and show what you're made of. Well, I hope I'm there, catching some of the light coming off you that day.
And like I said before, this is where I have to remind you why I created this video in the first place, because everything you heard from Silver has got to be one of the most impactful and important quotes in any Disney film. Yes, it's not like the other famous Disney films that have memorable phrases, but when you look back upon his own words, they are the most important to life itself, because to chart your own course brings us back to the fact that this line was used by my brother-in-law's best man for his toast for him and my own sister, that I finally realized the importance of this moment, and for Treasure Planet as a whole, about what it means. What this treasure means to anyone, to family, to friends, and all else that you love dear. For those to be there during the thick of it, during the tough times of which Silver proclaims compared to what we learned years ago that his father could never understand, either unknowingly or willingly, so that in the end, Jim could succeed far beyond his greatest expectations to be the man he was. And we can all take a page from this very moment, whether it be just for a toast to a happy couple's new adventure in life or to your own greatest accomplishments that humanity has yet to give, that this is the pinnacle of what all Treasure Planet represents, that unfortunately wasn't given the great light of day in the public during its time, but of course, over the years realizing that it is the heart of what made Disney special, including in the fact from one of Musker and Clement's only films since The Great Mouse Detective that weren't even the notable Disney musicals that we all love. Because what is more powerful than a villain saying to the hero that they can't wait to see the light coming off of them, representing a true triumph in the adventurous spirit, that they want to be there for them till the end to see it through. It hardly happens since they're not even associated with light at all, and actually helping the heroes since they never help anyone but themselves. And that embrace that Jim does represents everything that needed to be since the very beginning. That this troubled child who couldn't find his way in life just needed someone who believed in him, who apparently just happened to be this mutinous cyborg who he's warned about at the very beginning, also embracing him in this hug before realizing what he must do in his own mission. The other conflict of duality that Silver constantly faced between wanting treasure or helping others find what treasure truly means. Because of course his crew will want him to be the leader they all expect him to be, to try to find the treasure and not care about any of the crew using them as vessels to get to that point. All of them are more after the material meaning of life compared to the good-hearted Silver who's helping Jim find that meaning. The nature that has to be called into question by Scroop and the others being the one who killed Arrow and wants nothing but this treasure himself, and also to kill Hawkins, who after his high on optimism gets pushed straight down when Silver tries to rein in his crew, saying all these nasty things that were covering up his good-hearted nature to keep them all in line.
You got the makings of greatness in you.
Shut your yap! I cozied up to that kid to keep him up our scent. But I ain't gone soft.
As mentioned before in Silver's own video, these are things we know are straight up lies despite what happens after and when they attack each other because of his facial expressions that he keeps giving each time they are mentioned. He only says this to his crew to keep them in order, as it has to be done in the past when he hid the treasure from the rest of the crew of the other films because he does have a bond with Jim. Every single time drilling in that nature that he does care even though he's a part of this crew wanting to enrich their own lives like any pirate would. I mean, sure, he started out with the same intention of what is mentioned here, but he just grew to understand and like him, even if the perspective of Jim seems like it was all for nothing, which is a very heartbreaking in any way you could view it, because we just spent time knowing them both grow and comfort each other, but now he's hidden down here and here's this actually seeing the shift that breaks everything apart. Because while it does take a while to build someone's spirit up, it's also equally as easy to knock them down within a second. The beginning of the mutiny amidst Captain Amelia, which Delbert and Jim, and more to some extent, tries to stop, and by stopping, I mean getting off the ship. Again, trying to protect the map as best they could do, but with more double-sided choosing between right and wrong nature. Again, mentioning before, Silver does have the chance to kill Jim right then and there, and after he escapes, but he just cannot find the courage to do so. He had his chances not once, but also twice in this sequence, but just like his past selves have proven to do also, he just chooses not to, thus confirming his nature that all of what he said right then and there were just not true and straight up lies, shown yet again by how he stopped his crew from blowing up the ship that the three eventually escaped on. I mean, obviously for the fact he thought they had the map, but how he isn't kind of that person, which now they obviously has to suffer down below in this crash in a dire situation that gets Amelia injured that Jim must find a way out of, leading to the meeting of Ben.
Of course I'm Ben, the bioelectronic navigator.
A robot who served as the navigator for Captain Flint. He's obviously based upon Ben Gunn from the original version, who was marooned on Treasure Island knowing of where the treasure Flint had, but now done in a clever way that fits the entire image of the movie. This is another nice choice that they made to change his character into a robot, making him rusty and crazy that can represent the years since he was stranded, with the difference here being that Flint can change what this Ben could or couldn't remember rather than what actually happened originally when he stored it elsewhere from the other pirates. So then they take him back to this place where unfortunately they get found by Silver once again, where he wants to have a talk with Jim, dealing with this dual-sided nature, saying what he said were clearly lies, which we obviously know, and the two actually believing that he could make a team out with Hawkins.
Whatever you heard back there, at least the part concerning you, I didn't mean a word of it. That bloodthirsty lot had thought I'd gone soft. They'd have gutted us both.
The point of conversations like this is to probably lead you to lean more on Jim's side rather than Silver's, because he still is a pirate who promises to blast them all if they can't get what they want and still seek the treasure, with still more hints of regret and sadness for what he has done or the relationship that is clearly still there. Yet how Jim tries to wise up from what he did personally to follow his own course without any of the sappy light on the back of his sails talk, refusing to do any deals for the better of his own stake.
All that talk of greatness? Light coming off my sails? What a joke.
See here, Jimbo.
I mean, at least you taught me one thing, stick to it, right? Well, that's just what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna make sure that you never see one doubloon of my treasure.
That treasure is owed me by thunder!
I'll try to find it without my map, by thunder!
Proving that he does learn from his journey to better himself, but not know it quite yet from someone who did mentor him and made him believe that he could be more than what was seen. All to get to the map mainly, as we see that he has to do with Ben, since Morph kind of disguised it as himself than when he was still on the ship, which they go to find a map this time, but then how they run into Scroop after his attempt to disable the cannons kinda got screwed up since they were trying to prevent Silver from his own threats. Which I would also like to add, Scroop is also more of a truer villain for the film, based upon his own actions where he could have alluded to his own mutiny to Silver, killing Arrow, and the major disdain for cabin boy Jim, who intends to kill in these very scenes. Also remembering that he was based upon the other character of Israel Hands, who was a real pirate serving under Blackbeard himself, but also used in the Treasure Island story on a name basis as the same second in command to characters like Silver in some adaptations, who Jim also kills, because he was going to kill him anyway. Going back to this version doing something similar, but all because of Ben's clumsiness of not knowing how to rewire the ship, turning the anti-gravity that allows them to all float endlessly into space, and how he meets his own demise. He caused the others like Mr. Arrow in the death drifting above in the cold dark vacuum for all of eternity like the bastard truly deserved, which is something very interesting as a reversal of what all Disney villains experience, because they usually fall down and now he falls upwards, a reversal of those trends but still the same. And I just fully revel in the scene due to how they made him a cunning sadistic villain who kills when necessary regardless of the outcome, including Mr. Arrow to benefit the crew despite the objections of characters like Silver, who still wants to keep things clean in a mutiny. A villain with actual good morals compared to him who doesn't even care. That he is a true aspect of the pirate's treachery and he got what was coming for him in the entire film. Yet, even while finding the map, he still gets unfortunately caught by Silver, who is waiting there the entire time, possibly even using that threat to blast him off the ship to coax him on board and get rid of Scroop so they can retrieve it themselves and remove any naysayers that would have said otherwise. It's kind of genius if you think about that on that side of things, and how he relents into taking all of them in due to the demand of Jim, who knows more about the map than what might seem. Where we discover that the map is also a gateway to portals around the known universe used by Flint to conduct his raids to bring in the treasure.
He used his portal to roam the universe, stealing treasure.
But where'd he stash it all?
Where Ben's earlier words about the treasure being buried in the centroid of the mechanism relates to Treasure Planet itself. It's not really a planet, but an entire mechanism that the core was used to store its entire treasure, the loot of 1,000 worlds, or even more, that could be as large as our own moon itself. A grateful golden paradise that the crew looks with gleeful delight, finding this thing they search for at this entire time, while Jim finds a way to escape with his own, finding the decayed corpse of Flint on the back of Ben's own mind, telling him of what was truly hidden.
It's all flooding back! All my memories! Right up until Flint pulled my memory circuit so I could never tell anybody about his booby trap! Speaking of which...
And with every great pirate comes a great plan, where Flint finally turned the entire planet into a trap that any gleeful soul wouldn't even find himself without taking a second to notice, which causes the planet to become engulfed in flames, with all of the hard work down the drain, with several crew members dying in the molten treasure with no means left to escape until Silver eyes the young Hawkins, revving up Flint's small ship, a dubious nature but has something more. And what we see here is a man who threatens a boy to stay out of his way until something catches them off guard, like we just seen in the past every single time.
I like you, lad. But I've come too far to let you stand between me and my treasure.
With the greatest test in Treasure Planet, how it's always been their relationship and what we can see of what he really wants with the treasure, but constantly gets pushed off guard by certain events like the explosion that risk Jim's own life, from threatening him now and now trying to save him, reminding you of those earlier moments in the film of the many opportunities that John had to kill him right there, but how it's piled up on his side at the last second that he chooses not to. We get thrown off by a statement of him wanting to go through Jim to get his own treasure, but then we look at him conflicted between such treasure and Jim, and then choosing Jim because this entire character has always cared about him. Gold is always something people will want, but life's greatest treasure is in the adventure worth living for, and John Silver is a character that has standards. He proves himself worthy as the mentor that Jim needed, who stared down in the face of death for the course of the story, learning from his his own experiences despite being on different sides, now working together to get out of the planet, using what they learned about the portal to get easily back to Montresor. It is the choice that is made between life and death of what proves to be an actual villain or hero, or maybe just an antagonist overall to his main story. Because now you see all of his actions helping Jim completely, validating all of what he stood for in the past and removing the negative traits that made us question otherwise, that his own judgment was never in any doubt, proving of what he could be to save the entire crew, racing down the clock that even the mutinous prisoners praise at the very end for saving their own lives, except for the ones who sadly died again. The great achievements where Captain Amelia offers to recommend Jim for his bravery and selfless accomplishments to the Interstellar Academy, a move that surely would make his mom proud for the direction of life he wants, to the smiles of the backgrounds of those like Silver, whom he found later was trying to leave and escape justice for his apparent crimes. And he knows this well and is more willing to get it and see it through, offering him a Morph as a new companion. Again, vastly different to all the other times that Silver would leave Jim. Although they still had the same relationship bond in some form, it wasn't to the extent of this one, because the other version still had Silver threaten him earlier to kill Jim, but how he couldn't bring himself and allow them to part ways on somewhat good terms. But this one changes things for the better to become a completely heartfelt goodbye, who wants him to still join in as a partner of his own across the stars, but how he chooses not to do the right thing.
When I got on this boat, I would have taken you up on that offer, but I met this old cyborg, and he taught me that I could chart my own course. That's what I'm gonna do.
And this is the moment where Jim solidifies himself to become the hero of this very story, where instead of joining someone else that he's always wanted to be a part of, he finally got the courage to do his own thing, to find his own path in life from those who believed in him finally, where those who didn't should just truly be damned for not seeing that soul in his own talent that the world desperately needs. And Silver really sees this with the light actually coming off of him in the most emotional goodbye from a villain you could ever see, that Disney could never even do or top again, as most of these characters are just known for being bad.
Look at you, glowing like a solar fire. You're something special, Jim. You're going to rattle the stars, you are.
A separate point that makes Treasure Planet a greater film than what Treasure Island was, even in its own personal relationships that all of us face with, leaving us with the money to rebuild the inn and start life once more with the encouragement that seeks out for the better. And you could say they both deserve that, giving a chance to rebuild and a redemption for a freed villain to do what he pleases with his own life in this next chapter. And when they come home, everyone gets routinely impressed by their happy endings, and Jim finally joins in the academy, turning his life around for the better, looking down upon those who deserve their new fresh starts in life, up to the stars where Silver smiles down from the clouds. And whether it be something in Jim's imagination or whatever you might think that the stars themselves are letting him know, it just represents him achieving the goal that all Disney stories strive to show in a dream come true. A passionate end to a movie that truly deserved it all, even if society or the company itself wasn't willing to give the benefit of the doubt at that very time. Where finally, after reviewing all of this again, I truly realized that Treasure Planet is far more important than I could ever imagine. And I really did think after doing the Silver video that I would be mostly done about talking Treasure Planet or not involved talking about any of this, until again my own family of those I just met or somewhat know to an extent start quoting this movie itself, inspired by real events, whether it be weddings, birthdays, celebrations of life, or any events that connect us together, now seeping into the words of the ones we love, that its impact goes far above and beyond what we can even see or say for that matter, with John Silver's own words reflecting the best of what any man or woman could be, charting their own course in life that makes their family the proudest that they ever could in life. It is a heart that will be admired far more above the years, with a growing voice of those who loved it in the first place that would share it down the course of the Disney library for centuries to come. What was once considered to be an underrated classic will now grow itself into an incredible one with the best minds could only come up with, for the simple beauty of story and creativity and the courage to see the light come off the child that is still within our own hearts. And I hope you too can understand that by the passion I've talked about that carried with Jim Hawkins and John Silver, that we all have the makings of greatness in all of us. And I'm all done. Goodbye.